Welcome to the Sage Advice Podcast, transforming the way people think and work so their organizations can thrive. Well, hi everyone, and welcome to our podcast. I'm Ed Kless, and today's episode is cut from another podcast of which I am the co-host, The Soul of Enterprise, which is also sponsored by Sage. The Soul of Enterprise is dedicated to belief that business has a spiritual, though not necessarily religious, component. I hope you enjoy this excerpt. If you do, please visit www.thesoulofenterprise.com for more.
But I'm glad that we carved out a show for this, and we should have done it a lot sooner, because this is just one of those phrases that is, it's called a mini narrative in economics. You know, there are just certain phrases that conjure up whole things. Like if I say invisible hand, right? If I say revealed preference, if I say conspicuous consumption, right? These are things that you know contain a lot of knowledge in a small amount of words. Maybe my favorite is Larry Summers. Nobody ever washed a rental car. I've even tried to contribute with this to this mini narrative with surgeons piercing ears, but either way, Schumpeter has Schumpeter, I think is how you pronounce it actually, has left us a great concept here with creative destruction. And I need to point out that the economist Werner Sombart actually coined the phrase, but Schumpeter made it famous.
Yes, and it was a transition because there was the concept of creative destruction, and I was not aware of this until I did research for the show. And that's one of the great things about doing this, is that the concept goes back even further than that to Karl Marx.
Yep.
Where Karl Marx, although he did not use the specific term creative destruction, it was implied in a lot of his analysis. But what I think is most interesting is that he only really saw the destruction part, not the creative piece. So he got it right, but he got it exactly right for the wrong reason, and that is because what he saw was that capitalism would sow the seeds of its own destruction, because it was all about increased, and this is economic efficiency and doing things better and making sure that the production schedules were met on a quicker basis. And he saw it as destroying jobs. And what I find absolutely fascinating, Ron, is I had never realized that it goes back as far as Marx, but now I totally get it when people, especially those on the left, they're really just echoing Marxism. And Marx's thought about this is they only see the downside. They only see this as taking away jobs. They don't see it, as the creative part, the stuff that allows us to innovate and grow. But they don't see the fact that it also then is a necessary condition for the continued improvement of our lives.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And it's interesting because Schumpeter is, who's kind of hard to label, although he did call himself a conservative. He was for certain interventions in the economy. So he's an interesting thinker along those lines, but he also didn't think that capitalism would survive, but for different reasons than Mr. Marx.
Yes.
Which is probably a whole nother show, Ed, to get into, you know, what Schumpeter thought and why he thought it and what he thought might replace it. But I did find it interesting that, you know, he used to love saying he enjoyed saying that he aspired to become the greatest economist, horseman, and lover in the world. And then he said things were not going well with the horses.
Good for him.
So, he had quite an ego. But the first time he used the phrase was in 1942, and it was in his book, which I went and revisited this morning, Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy, which he wrote in 1942. It's his magnum opus, basically. And look, I don't know if you've read this thing, but it's a you want to talk about a hard read. You know how we talk about Hayek not being a very quotable writer? Neither is this guy. It is brutal to find a pithy quote, or pithy line from him. But
except for gales of creative destruction.
Yeah, and in that context, he said creative destruction is the essential fact about capitalism. Stabilized capitalism is a contradiction in terms.
For more sage advice, visit and subscribe at sageadvicepodcast.com.